Kirk Hammett is the renowned guitarist of heavy metal band Metallica. Born in San Francisco in 1962, he started with the band Exodus before joining Metallica in 1983. Kirk is celebrated for his ripping guitar solos and aggressive riffs, securing his place as one of the most important guitarists of our time. I was fortunate to get a chance to interview him last week in New York City. Here's my interview. Kirk, welcome.
Hey, bro.
Okay, so we were just talking about this. Talk about last night's gig here in New York.
Well, it was amazing because we just did 2 nights at MetLife Stadium. You were at the show last night.
Yep.
And afterwards, I was thinking, we sold 160,000 tickets in the tri-state area. And that's pretty significant because back in the day, back in 1983, Metallica, well, I should say 1981, Metallica had a very soft start in LA. Then in 1982, they came up to the Bay Area and they got Cliff Burton. And then right after they left the Bay Area and came to New York, that's when I joined the band. And they were already here on the East Coast. When I came out to join the band, I flew out to Jamaica, Queens. You know, I'd never been out of California before. And when I arrived at JFK and did the drive to Jamaica, Queens, I was horrified. I'd never experienced anything like New York City before in my life. I was from San Francisco, and apples and oranges, you know, the people, the culture, just everything. And I was just overwhelmed by it all. And then I got to the music building, which was this messed up building with no heat, no hot water. And I found out that that's where we were going to be staying. And, you know, I was told to bring a sleeping bag. So I had a sleeping bag in my suitcase. You know, I met Cliff first, because Lars and James were asleep in the room we were going to be rehearsing in. It was like 7 o'clock at night. Cliff said, "There's a piece of foam. We're tearing foam off the walls and sleeping on it." And I was like, all right, got my foam, put the sleeping bag on there, and just waited for Lars and James to wake up. And then we started playing. And, you know, from that point on, I was in the band. But my point is, when we arrived here in 82, well, they arrived in well, I guess you could say it was like 83. We were staying in Old Bridge, New Jersey, and we were playing clubs. And we would play all these clubs in the tri-state area to, you know, 100 people, 150 people, 200 people. You know, the most, maybe 500 or 600 people. We're like, wow. And it was like, you know, it was like reliving the club slog that we had just left on the West Coast all over again on the East Coast. And then we recorded Kill 'Em All up in Rochester. And then we went on tour, and then, you know, our career unfolded. But the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, it's been an enormously amazing trip, you know, from playing small clubs in Jersey and in Connecticut, you know, and in New York, you know, all the way to the MetLife Stadium. And New York has always been so supportive of us. And I just feel the love. And it was just such a great opportunity to be able to really come back to New York and just share that love with everyone.
I noticed that the crowd is incredibly diverse, age-wise, males, females. The young kids, though. Now, my kids, I have kids that are 15, 13, and 10. And because of Stranger Things, they know Metallica.
The immediate thing I get from that is that our music is transgenerational. You know, all the best classical, all the best classic rock, you know, all the best musicians, still relatable. Master of Puppets is still relatable. We recorded that album in 1985 and it came out in 1986. It's amazing because, you know, at that time we were 23, 24 years old. And when I listen to that album nowadays, I think, wow, it's really musically mature. Because we weren't really that mature back then. In fact, we were just all over the place, you know. We're young guys who were just looking for trouble, basically, you know, looking for fun, kicks, whatever. MetLife, all right? I look out into the audience, and you're right. the demographic is super wide. It ranges from really, really young kids.
Yes.
I mean, like 7 or 8, all the way to old fuckers like me, and even like occasionally people were even older than me. But then I think about it and I think, well, Kill 'Em All came out in 1983, and that's almost 40 years ago.
Right.
And if like, a guy who was 30 years old bought Kill 'Em All
Exactly.
back then, he's 70 years old now, and chances are he's in the audience. And you know, I look for those guys, and I see him. I just like, yeah. And then I look for the younger kids too. And, you know, I look at him and try to acknowledge him, try to acknowledge the youngest kids in the audience. And if they're in the snake pit, I'll let them like play my guitar, you know. But it's an enormous blessing to be able to put out an album 40 years past, and people put it on, young kids, and go, wow, this is cool. You know, it's great. It's how I felt when I was like 13 or 14 and I first heard Highway Star. I was like, there's nothing like this on the radio, right? You know? And then I heard the Ramones. I was like, hey, that's kind of like Highway Star. You know, and I instantly drew a connection between hard rock and punk in my mind right away, you know, when I was like 15 or 16. And back in the day, San Francisco and the Bay Area had a super healthy punk scene. I mean, when punk came out, it seemed like there was all of a sudden like 30 punk bands just showed up overnight in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. And so because of that, you know, punk music and new wave was played on a lot of college stations in San Francisco. And that's what me and the guys in Exodus would listen to. We would listen to hard rock, heavy metal, and punk rock. You know, people will say, well, what drives you guys? You know, how do you guys get your sound? What is it? What is it? You know, where did it come from? And I always tell people, you know, it's a hybrid thing. It's a hybrid thing between 70s hard rock and 70s punk rock.
Interesting.
We're not influenced by hardly anything that came out in the 80s or 90s or past. You know, all the stuff that I'm influenced, it just all comes from like British hard rock, you know, American hard rock, you know, garage stuff, punk rock.
But you guys had a sound in your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
That of what Metallica was. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that by the Master of Puppets record that really was kind of that you had coalesced into this sound?
Yeah.
That's kind of a blueprint record?
But it wasn't never anything that we sat down and talked about or made like a big list of rules, you know, or, you know, regulations or anything like that. It was mostly instinctual, you know, trusting our ears, trusting our hearts, and recognizing what would work and what wouldn't work. But most importantly, with an idea of trying different things. Metallica has always tried different things. We've always took a chance. Even if some band members weren't fully on, you know, there's been times I haven't been fully on, and I was just like, I'm gonna take a chance, you know, a leap of faith, you know, lean on my other 3 band members. It's always been worth it. It's always been worth it, even though sometimes we've taken chances and they've failed horribly from a commercial standpoint. I think creatively and artistically, I think they're huge successes. And, you know, I speak specifically about Lulu, the album we did with Lou Reed, and also about Saint Anger. Mm-hmm. You know, those are really divisive albums. And you know, you have 2 camps, people who like it and people who don't. I think stuff like that's important to have in your catalog, you know, because you just don't want just a lot of the same thing. You know, you want peaks and valleys. You want contrast. It's what makes it interesting. And if you have a catalog that's just perfect, people get bored of it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
You know, there's a lot of the same thing. You know, sometimes people want to, you know, get challenged by their favorite band. I love Yes. You know, the first 3 or 4 Yes albums are brilliant. But then they took a friggin' left turn into somewhere else. And I loved it. Because it was challenging,
right?
You know, and it forced me to listen even harder. So, I mean, getting back to Master of Puppets, it was something that just kind of like just flowed out of us. It was largely instinctual, but it was also, just willing to try different things. It's always a quest, at least for me. Create music that no one's ever heard before.
Right.
It always sounds like a tall order to people, I think. But, the secret of it is just put as much of yourself as you can into it, as much of your own personality, technique, quirks, instinct, When people say don't do that, do it. And then you can't fail. It will sound like you.
So you have a riff, whatever it might be, and you want to play it for the other guys. You just have a piece of an idea. Do you just say, hey, check this out, and you're kind of apprehensive about it to see what they're going to say?
It's weird because, all of us are constantly writing.
Right.
And the problem with Metallica is there's too many ideas.
Right.
I'm not saying all my ideas are freaking great, or all of anyone's ideas are great. But, when you have a thought,
yep,
you want to follow through on the thought. And so what happens with me is, I'll show up and I'll have a bunch of riffs I want to show the guys. And I will always show them the riffs that I think they're, if I categorize them into A, B, and C, I'll always show them the C riffs first.
Why is that?
Because, I want them to get the impression that, it's not going to get worse from here. It's only going to get better from here.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
But the thing that happens is sometimes I'll play them a C riff and they'll go, that's fucking great. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then I'll play them B riff and they're like, eh. And then I'll play them an A riff and go, check this out. And they're like, play that C riff again. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. It happens more often with all of us. What we think is great might not be the greatest idea to someone else. But then, I have my A riffs that I consider bulletproof. You play them once or there are people like, yes.
Okay, so what would be one of those that as soon as you played it?
72 Seasons. I mean, the fast riff, that was something, play it once and everyone's like, that's something. I played it for the guys who are like, okay, that's,
Now,
it ended up being the opening song to the...
Are you playing this on your phone, or are you actually playing it?
I always
play.
I only play it on my phone when I can't figure out what I played.
Right.
That happens a lot, too.
Okay.
I'll have a weird chord in there or some dissonance. I'm like, what the hell? And I'm listening to my phone. There's cars going by or something. So it makes it even harder to figure out. Point being is sometimes you need to rely on other people for perspective because a lot of times, your perspective and your instinct, while always true, won't hold weight with other people. Could be true with you and resonate with you, but not necessarily with other people. And that's totally fine.
I want to go back and talk about your gear. I know that you love talking about gear like I do, but talk about gear from the first 3 records. Mm-hmm. What were you guys using? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the guitar rigs.
Mm-hmm. For the first 2 albums, we basically used modded Marshalls.
Okay.
Kill 'Em All was recorded with a modded Marshall that James had got from L.A. Couldn't remember who did the mod.
It was like a Jose Hernando kind of type mod.
Yeah, but not Jose.
Right.
Not Cesar, two guys who did stuff down in L.A. That amp got stolen in Boston in 1984. And man, whoever ended up with that amp, they don't know what they're sitting on top of, I'm sure. We went to Mesa Boogie.
Okay.
We said, we're here to buy amps, give us an endorsement. And they said, we'll give you 2 for 1. And we're like, okay. And they said, well, we had these new amps, with 3 gain stages and an EQ. And I was looking at them. I was thinking, okay, this is something that we need to check out. And then I remember calling James and going, James, we need to do a second trip down to Mesa Boogie. You need to come with me. And so we both went down there, and they had these new heads they were making. And they only made these heads for maybe 10, 12 months or something.
Yeah.
It was the Mark II C+.
Yes.
And And we played those and we were blown away. And what made them particularly great is that they were really responsive to active pickups. We had EMG guitar pickups in our guitars.
Yep.
So EMG pickups with these amps were the sound for us. We were like, holy shit, this is it. This is it. We're taking these with us to Denmark and we're recording with them. And actually, no, I stand corrected. We bought those Mesa Boogie amps and then we did the Ride the Lightning tour.
Okay.
The Ride the Lightning American tour. And that was the tour where we learned how to dial them in. Because we'd never really had, amps like that before. It was just strictly Marshall amps, Fender amps, And so the 3 gain stages, the push-pull, was it 8-band graphic EQ or 4-band, whatever, 5-band?
Yeah.
It was what we wanted and what we needed at the time. And that was the amps that we took into the studio from 1985 to now. We're still using them.
Okay, and what would be your rig as far as your pedal rig? You had a wah-wah.
I always have a wah and a tube screamer.
Okay.
Ever since I was about 15 years old. I'm not much for delay or reverb. Mm-hmm. And guitar players come up to me and go, I noticed that you hardly ever use delay or reverb. And I thought about it and I thought, well, some of my favorite guitar players always have delay on. Like Neil Schon always has his delay on. Neil. I love Neil Schon. I know you love him too.
Yes.
So one day I went and started playing my amp, and adding a little delay. And I thought, I like playing with delay, but it's kind of makes it easier.
Right.
And I thought, I'm just not going to play with delay anymore. And it's just, there's something about it, and it's just, the note just hitting me. It feels like when there's delay, it's going away from me. And yeah, to a certain extent it is. But, it's something, when I play without delay, it just feels like it's coming more from my inner thing, whatever that is.
Okay, so the tube screamer, though, is this something that it was part of the sound? Would you have that on when you're playing rhythm?
Yes.
And
not rhythm, almost always
only for lead, right?
Only for leads. And, I'm not one for using distortion pedals for rhythm because the gain needs to be tight, harmonically tight. The sound has to be tight. You can't have frequencies just kind of bouncing around randomly. Needs to be balanced, needs to have, some sort of, flow to the frequencies. And I love that aspect because if you know about that, then you can sound sculpt correctly. Because when I was a kid, I was just randomly turn stuff. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it wasn't. With my rhythm sound, it's a lot cleaner than you think.
Talk about that.
Greg Philman is always pushing me to just add more distortion, but I only like a distorted rhythm sound to an extent because I need that punch. I need to feel like the strings are hitting, I need to hear every single string when I hit a chord. And, I need to hit one note and you can feel it, If you have too much distortion, it feels like sponge. It's spongy, I need bark, I need hit, I need it so when you go dunk, you physically feel it. And James is the same way. And it's always been that way. It's always been that way for him. And it's always been that way for me. And, the fortunate thing when James and I first started playing together is we basically come from the same musical places. It was just Sabbath, UFO, Aerosmith, Kiss, Van Halen,
right.
And then Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, new wave of British heavy metal, Motorhead. We like the same stuff. We like the same guitar sounds. Him and I, basically, even though he grew up in Southern California and I come from Northern California, we're very, very similar players. The only difference is I play more leads. That's the only difference, And his right hand is so precise.
Yes.
My left hand, I got a lot of my precision in my left hand. His precision is in his right hand, and we've learned so much from each other. And James, I love him. I love him as a musician. I love him as a brother. But it's hard being in a band with him because sometimes he shows up and he'll play something. I'm like, where did that come from? I've never heard anyone play something like that. And it's still coming. You know, it's just like, you know, moth into a flame. There's a rhythm thing where it's just, I never heard this on an album. It's like a gallop with a pull-off. I mean... No one's ever done that before.
Yeah, how does he...
No one has ever done that before.
The right-hand things that he does like that they're so tight.
He doesn't really even like have to work at it. He can fall out of bed, pick up a guitar, and man, there's like 16th notes coming out effortlessly. And I love that.
So wait, I got to say this. So I always joke about when I try to play your songs that I can't do downstrokes like that anymore. I just can't.
I've been doing that since I was a kid, and it's all because of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols.
And why is it the downstrokes are more, the impact of playing the downstrokes versus adding in the upstrokes?
Because when you go, it adds more high end.
Because the higher notes hit first.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And you get less percussion.
Yes.
And, you know, it's really important, you know, palm of your hand.
Yep.
And like as close to the saddles as possible, you know, and, you know, I love it. I love that sound, you know. It's full on. You know, it's any Ramon song.
Any Ramon song.
I became really good friends with Johnny Ramone. I hang out with him constantly. And, you know, he was a really, really funny guy, really like crazy, divisive character again. He was a contrarian, you know, just for his own sort of like amusement. You'd say something, he would just instantly say it. Right? And he used to say to me, Kirk, the only good heavy metal band out there is Black Sabbath. I'm like, whatever you say, Johnny. And you go, Kirk, you know, all these other guitar players, they're crap. The best guitar player out there is Jimmy Page. I'm like, whatever you say, Johnny. And, you know, I would let him have his opinions. And then I'd say, John, you know, you've been a huge influence on me. And you tell him this all the time. He goes, how can I be an influence on you? How can I be an influence on you? I go, Johnny, the way you pick. You know, it's like it's an influence on so many people. Right. And I said, how did you come up with that? And he goes, I was just counting. That's the only way I could count is through downstrokes. And I said, Johnny, brilliant. It was the only way he can like keep time. He was keeping time by doing just downstrokes. He fucking practically created a whole genre of music doing that. And it's amazing to hear that, you know?
Do you ever listen to some of your old songs, though, and think, man, that's kind of a weird riff?
All the time.
Okay, what's a song that even today you think, God, that's a weird riff?
Well, Leper Messiah. That opening riff, when I first heard that, I was like, that's such a weird-sounding riff. But then I also recognized that that riff is a guitar player's fucking dream because it's fun to play and it's so sideways. And when you play it, you're like, wow, this is a sideways riff, but it is really, really cool. I mean, we have a lot of sideways riffs.
You have a lot of sideways riffs.
Yeah, the riff in And Justice for All is you know, there's a few riffs in there. They're just like all over the place. And, you know, as a band, that was kind of our proggy sort of period.
Okay, talk about that, because you guys do have a prog element to it that I don't think people really talk about that much.
But we're not influenced by
You're not influenced by prog, but you have progressive moments.
Yeah, and that is experimenting the limits of our capabilities. And again, always trying to do something new. And back then, we figured out that playing along with different time signatures, we started on a Master Puppets. Playing along with different time signatures was a really, really great way of mixing up our songs. And so that was our exploration into that. At the time, when we were writing that album, 1988, music was pretty complicated back then. There was shredders everywhere, you know.
Yes.
Music was divided right down the line. You had your super players, and then you had your kind of like players that weren't so great, you know. I guess we were kind of like influenced by what was going on at the time, which was showing that you can play, basically. And that's what really, and Justice for All, the music is largely about, is just like exploring what the boundaries are for us.
Talk about jazz. I know you've talked about this before about listening to jazz when you were a kid.
Yeah, you know, my parents or listened to a lot of jazz. I have an older brother who's 11 years older than me. He was listening to jazz. You know, I remember my parents talking about going to shows when I was younger in the 70s, you know, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter, you know, all these great names. And as a kid, I was just like, you know, I don't know who these people are. But as I became older, I was like, damn, my parents saw some really, really like huge musical, you know, personalities. But I've always been attracted to saxophone. There's something about saxophone that's similar to me. It's like guitar, but with the voice.
Yeah.
With the horn version of guitar. So I've always gravitated to like people like John Coltrane, you know, Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter, you know, a lot of the great players. I like the blue period of jazz, which is like, you know, 1956 or something to like 1966 or whatever. You know, I love all the various mutations of Miles Davis's career, John Coltrane's career, and I love Tal Farlow, I love Wes Montgomery, I love Jimmy Rainey, I love those players. You know,
you mentioned something about improvising last night though when we were talking about,
and so I love the improvisational aspect of jazz, and you know, really going out there and putting yourself on a limb and not knowing what's going to happen in the moment. I love spontaneity. I love playing in the moment. I love being surprised wherever it comes from. You know, all of a sudden, wow, this is what's going on, and like, okay, I'm on this trip. Like I said earlier, I had a cousin who played jazz saxophone. He was always playing Coltrane and stuff. And when I first started playing guitar, he used to like rally me into a corner and start lecturing me about music. And he said, never play a solo the same way. Always play it differently. Never play the song the same way. Always play it differently. I'm like, okay. It stuck with me, you know?
Right.
And so to this day, I try not to play solos if I'm improvising. I try to play.
Now, there's certain solos that you need to play.
I need to play because people have heard it so many times. And, you know, I understand this. If you've heard, you know, the intro to Fade to Black 5,000 times, and
it's probably way more than 5,000 times too that they've heard it.
It becomes more of a part to me.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, when I'm playing in concert, okay, I play a solo, but it's not really a solo anymore. It's a part because people want to hear it as it was recorded. And, you know, the first 7 or 8 albums, I respect that. But from a certain part on, I just like certain solos, I just open up. I don't know what the heck I'm going to play. And the ending solo of Fade to Black, I never know what I'm going to play from night to night. I leave it open, just whatever comes to mind. And there are some of the older songs I kind of leave open and change. But, you know, for me, it's a vital part of being a musician. It's a vital part of being able to tap into the unknown without thinking about it too much. You know, it's a vital part of being some sort of like empty vessel so that music can flow through you. And I sincerely believe that if you think too much about the creating process, then you're holding yourself back. You're actually getting in your own way. The best way to create is to just be present in the moment, open up your mind, and see what comes. My most recent experience with this is a couple weeks ago. Rob flew out to Hawaii, and we the goal was to come up with 8 instrumentals to play for 8 shows, 8 different instrumentals, and he had his recordings of 8 ideas that were going to be the seeds, but we never got to those 8 ideas. We sat down, and it was the thing, you know. Let's see what happens. He started playing something. I was like, what's that? That's good. Play that. Oh, that's good. And he goes, oh, I can do this. And next thing you know, we have something that didn't exist 2 minutes ago.
Well, I witnessed you guys working on something last night before the show. Which was so totally cool.
Yeah, and we came up with these 8 instruments for one day, for the next day, and it was just amazing to me because we didn't even touch his ideas. We were just there, present in the moment, waiting for something to show up, and it showed up. And it was it reconfirms my faith in this process. If you have the right attitude, right openness, and your eyes, your ears, your mind, and your heart open, great things happen, man. Great things happen. It's hard to get to this point, though, and it takes a lot of discipline to get to this point, and it takes a lot of thinking about writing music, and I do think about writing music. I don't just do that process, I think, okay, A sharp, not to E this time, but to C. Yeah, everyone does that, and I create riffs that way, but the best stuff just shows up in the moment. Like, okay, Enter Sandman. I wasn't thinking about anything. All of a sudden, I'm literally like watching my fingers. I'm like, okay, press record. Okay, great. Thanks. It was 3:00 in the morning. I went to bed afterwards.
And then what, you turned it on the next day?
Next morning.
Right?
Yeah. And then I read something about the exact same thing that happened to Keith Richards with the Satisfaction riff. I was like,
right.
Maybe there's something going on at 2 or 3 in the morning for musicians. I don't know.
Now, when you brought that riff in, like, what would be the development of that song?
Well, it was different. It wasn't the repeating motif, because I just didn't think too much about it. I was just like, hey, idea. I didn't hold it in as high regard as everyone else.
Was that a C riff?
It was a C riff. But then Lars said, that first part, repeat it. And then instantly it became an A riff. And that's a perfect example, of just like something that you think, okay, there might be a spark there. But then someone hears it, and then it's like lightning to them. They see potential that you don't see. Also, I think that's why collaboration is so important, because everyone hears everything differently.
Okay.
And you might have a perspective on something, and someone has a completely different perspective, and that is valuable. Because a lot of times you can't get outside your own head and have a real honest opinion on what you're doing. You can, but it's difficult when it comes to music.
Would a song like that, when you come up with this opening riff and you play it for the guys, and Lars says, repeat it over, and then where does it go from there?
It becomes a jam.
It becomes a jam.
A jam. We're all jamming on it, like trying different things, moving things. People stop and start. I'm like, doing different positions. Everyone goes into like concentration mode, and then someone goes, hey, check this out, or 3 of us will go, hey, we all, and then we'll go down the line. What's the best thing? And for us, ego goes out the door. It's all about the best thing rises to the top, and we're fully committed to what it is. It doesn't matter who it comes from.
And where do the melody ideas and the lyric things come in? Do some of those things happen during the jam, or is this always after the song is formed?
Well, the lyrics and the vocals definitely are some of the last things that come in.
Yeah.
And James wants the song completely written before he puts lyrics to it. And I understand that, because a lot of the vocal stuff he does is rhythm-based,
Yes.
or it comes off of a riff, or there's an arrangement and he thinks, oh, that's a good place for a vocal, Yeah, that's great.
Will you play it together live and he'll sing it through the mic and see how it feels?
No. What he'll do is he'll come in and he'll lay stuff down, and then we come in and then we listen to it. And, that's the best way to do it, because he's not distracted by us and our opinions. And, that's the way we all kind of like to work, And so a lot of the times he'll go in and do his stuff, and then we'll check in and we'll see what's working or not. But usually Greg Fiddleman, who's our producer, he's kind of like the first person in there going, James, this part can be better. Or, James, this needs to change. And it saves us, the effort to having to tell him that. Because sometimes, you need someone to play good cop, bad cop in the studio.
Right.
You just need that.
Pretty much all the time.
Yeah. You need someone who can kind of rise above everyone's thought processes.
Let me ask you something. Let's go back to working with Bob Rock. Like on the Black Album, for example, Lars would play a lot of straighter grooves, and the rhythm parts would bounce off of them with upbeat accents and things like that. Is that something Bob would say, hey, Lars, why don't you play straight there? Or would he make suggestions on things like that?
Occasionally he would.
Yeah.
Going into the Black Album, though, we consciously wanted to write shorter songs that were more groove-oriented, that had a little bit more swing. And when I say swing, I'm not talking about jazz swing. I'm talking about AC/DC, ZZ Top type swing.
Right.
British rock type swing.
Yeah.
My friend calls it British funk. He says John Bonham's the funkiest drummer out there. British funk. Listening, going, you're right, man. You're right. But that swing and groove. Jason Newsted used to call it soul groove. We gotta get that soul groove in there.
Yeah.
And that is part of the one aspect of the Black Album that's pretty overlooked. There is a real swinging groove that's through most of the album.
I think it's due to those straighter drum grooves like that, and the way that the guitars and bass work. Phil Rudd.
Frank
I've always thought that
kind of groove.
Yes, I've always thought that has the AC/DC for.
We all love Phil Rudd, for the simplicity and just like the accuracy and just the groove.
Yeah.
He propelled all those great AC/DC songs so well.
Yes.
Phil Rudd's a big hero in our camp.
Now, I've watched the documentary, The Making of that record, and talk about your approach to the rhythm sounds on that record versus Master of Puppets, for example.
Well, James did the rhythms, and again, Mesa Boogie, Mark II C+.
Yep.
But this is the first time we had worked with Bob Rock.
Yeah.
And Bob Rock did something that we weren't really accustomed to, and that was blending amps.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Okay, talk about that.
Amp blending. And, for the Black Album, literally there was maybe 6 or 7 different amps for that rhythm sound, and maybe 3 or 4 amps for the lead sound. But it was all blending. And, disparate amps you wouldn't even think, Blackface Fenders are in there, Matchless, Black Cat, I don't know if you remember that combo. It was a great sounding combo.
Yeah.
The Matchless Black Cat, that was kind of like the secret weapon, My Dumble is in there in the mix. The Mesa Boogie Mark II Cs are in there. There's vintage Marshalls. Bob Rock has a really great modded Marshall. I think it's Cesar modded Marshall, or maybe it's a Jose modded Marshall. That's in the mix, and so it's really great, to be able to do that. You create another problem, and the problem is, what are you going to do when you go on tour?
Right.
You can't start blending amps because it's going to be a nightmare.
Right.
You wouldn't need 3 guitar techs to do that, literally. We came up with this way where we had this amp thing where we were able to blend a couple amps. It was possible for us to blend a couple amps. And we did that at the beginning of the Black Album tour. And over the course of the tour, we were able to dial in our amps after a while with sounds that worked for us. And so, that's what we ended up doing. It would have been great if we had fractals back then.
Okay, so talk about the role of guitar when you were a kid and it calming you down.
So when I was a kid, I grew up in a bad neighborhood in San Francisco. It was never safe on the streets, and bad things happened to me as a child, and that's a completely different story. But when I discovered guitar, it calmed me down, it grounded me, and it gave me purpose, and and it gave me a forward-looking vision and goal, and it was it just like I didn't run to the guitar knowing this, you know. Kind of discovered this after cradling the thing for like 2 or 3 weeks and playing freaking like open chords and playing Wild Thing
Right.
along with, you know, Jimi Hendrix. I can play a Jimi Hendrix song. But it calmed me down. It gave me a sense of joy that wasn't really in my life. I just embraced the instrument so much, and I already loved music. Music was an everyday thing for me already, and to be able to like tap into that and get closer to music in general was a huge revelation. And yes, I know this sounds like cliche, but music saved my life, man. It really did. You know, if I didn't have a guitar, I would have probably ended up joining a gang, getting into trouble, you know, who knows? Who the hell knows what
So
it would
you
happen.
still though have the excitement. So
yeah.
you love to play.
I am like the biggest cheerleader in the world for guitar playing, for music, for musicians. And most importantly now, my eye is focused on, you know, the next generations coming up. And, you know, it's important for me to acknowledge the power of inspiration, because when I was a teenager, I was so inspired. I was inspired by Jimi Hendrix, you know, Jimmy Page, Michael Schenker, Gary Moore, you know, just all these great guitar players, Jeff Beck, you know, Eric Clapton, all these great players. And I was like in rapture almost, you know, just how great these guys were and how much it affected me and like made me want to play more and made me want to just explore why they did the things they did when they're playing guitar, because I was inspired. And, you know, I see kids nowadays and they seem to be so inspired by our music. And I pick up on that.
Okay, wait, we need to talk about this, about Greeny here. For people that don't know Greeny, this is Greeny. Talk about this guitar.
Okay, so this is Greeny. Greeny is a 1959 Les Paul that was bought in like 1964 or 1965 in London by a guy named Peter Green, who at the time had just replaced Eric Clapton in the Blues Breakers. And he had this guitar. And so he started playing it. And at some point, this pickup got damaged. So he took it to this place, and this guy named Sam Lee, who was a jazz guitar player who gave John McLaughlin guitar lessons.
Okay. Wow.
Yes. He repaired this pickup.
Okay.
But he put it in backwards, and he used the wrong type of wiring, which is key. People just think, you know...
Key for the sound.
Yeah.
Now.
He used the wrong type of wiring when he put it in. So when Peter Green got it back, he's like, hey, this is different. And, you know, it's just like, he's like, okay, yeah, that sounds good, you know. Yeah, that sounds good. But when you put it in the middle, it's an out-of-phase sound. But it's a thick out-of-phase sound. A lot of times when you put a guitar out of phase, it gets a little thin, you know, and loses body. Not this one, it's thick and has body. And to me, in my head, it sounds like a Strat to a 100-watt Marshall, you know? And I'm thinking, wait a second, Les Pauls aren't supposed to have that tonal aspect. But when you turn it up, you know, it's like... It sounds like a great Strat. I love that. And, you know, crazy things happen when it's in that position.
Ooh, I hear that high.
Yeah, you can hear
that, those high harmonics and everything.
You can hear
beautiful.
The little dance of harmonics,
yeah.
You know? And so when Peter Green got this, this repair, he loved it and kept it this way. Mm-hmm. He went on to form Fleetwood Mac.
Yep.
And recorded a bunch of amazing songs, you know, Green Man Unleashed, Oh Well, Black Magic Woman, Albatross, a lot of the stuff that was written on this guitar and recorded on this very guitar. Fleetwood Mac back then, they're a blues rock band, and they're pretty popular from what I could gather back in the day. Yeah. They did tours of America, tours of the States, whatever. And Peter Green was quickly being recognized as a real formidable player, and his playing, you know, when I listen to it now, it's so tasty, and it's like all the right notes all the time. I mean, it's just like, damn, this guy. But in 1970, he was having difficulties, you know. He had mental issues, and he kind of lost his, I don't know what it was. He just didn't want to play music anymore. So he quit Fleetwood Mac. And, you know, he had this guitar. One day, Gary Moore, who was a young upstart guitarist back then, and a big Peter Green fan, went to go visit him. And he saw the guitar and they said, "Peter, you're not playing guitar anymore. What are you going to do with this Les Paul?" And Peter said, "You know, I'll sell it to you. You know, what do you got?" And Gary Moore's like, "I have this SG and like 150 quid or something like that." You know? And so he got this guitar from Peter Green. Mm-hmm. And then Gary Moore, had it for like the next 30 years.
Right.
And this guitar is on all the Gary Moore albums. It's on my favorite Thin Lizzy album, Black Rose, that I've been listening to ever since I was like 15 or 16. And you know, he played it a lot. He played it on some of the most classic Gary Moore tunes. You know, Still Got the Blues. And so in like 2004 or 5, Gary Moore ran into a situation where he had to sell this guitar. So he sold it to this collector, this British guy, and this collector had it for like 4 or 5 years, and then he wanted to sell it. So he put it on the market for $2 million, and no one was interested in buying a $2 million guitar. There's very few people out there who are interested in buying a $2 million guitar. It didn't sell. So he cut the price in half, $1 million. It still didn't sell. And then, you know, Greeny made the rounds. Guitar shows, dealers, you know, constantly being shopped to all these collectors, you know, all these guitar players. Everyone passed on Greeny. And so I remember at one point I was in London, 2014, and I called up my friend. I said, "Hey, what are you doing? What you got going?" He goes, "Oh, I got a guitar to show you." And I said, "Which guitar?" And he said, "Greeny." And I'm like, "I'm not interested in a $2 million guitar." He goes, No, that's all poppycock. It's not $2 million. It's not $1 million. I'm like, "Okay, bring it over." And literally, bro, when I got this guitar in my hands and I started, you know, playing it, doing my thing, in 2 minutes, I said to him, "I'm not giving you this guitar back." Because I went to that, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, 100-watt Marshall, Strat to 100-watt Marshall. This is crazy. I didn't know this guitar was capable of that. Greeny's been with me pretty much the whole time.
You played it for about 5 songs last night.
I
play it all the time.
Plays every day.
Right.
It's always where I sleep. Greeny's probably about 5 or 6 feet away from me. And I just realized that not that long ago. You know, it's a little pathetic when I think about it.
Okay, so we have to tell this story that you told me last night.
2 weeks ago, I woke up, and I wake up early. You know, contrary to what people think of musicians or whatever, I wake up at the crack of dawn. I usually wake up about 5:30 or 6, and it's because of surfing. You know, really, it's just like that. All the best ways are in the morning. So I got up one morning. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting at my desk drinking my coffee, and of course I have a stack of guitar magazines because I still read all the guitar magazines. And like I'm sipping out of the corner of my eye, I see the stack of guitar magazines just sliding off the desk. I'm like, and in slow motion, I turn my head and I see the stack graze Greeny's neck like this, and then Greeny going in slow motion, bap, onto the ground. And I'm like, and like set down my coffee, picked it up, And sure enough, there was the existing crack that's right here. It's been there since Gary Moore days. Mm-hmm. That crack opened up. And, you know, I hate admitting this to the audience, but, you know, I started bawling like a baby. I don't know why. It was a weird emotional reaction, you know, and I'm actually surprised. I was surprised by my reaction. I called my tech. You know, I said, Justin, you'll never believe what just happened. And I told him, and he said, right, you need to call Gary Brower, who's always been my guy in the Bay Area, one of the best guitar setup guys, repair guys, and I've known him forever. Actually, I met him the very first day I met Joe Satriani because they both worked in the same music store in Berkeley. So I have a long history with Gary. And Gary said, I sent him pictures, and Gary said, it doesn't look as bad as you think. I go, what do you mean? Literally, the gap was like this, you know, the open crack was like this. And I sent him pictures, and he goes, that's great. I go, you're nuts. He goes, no, let me explain. You want big open cracks like that so that you can get the glue in there.
It's true.
You know, and cover as much surface area as possible.
Yep.
And I thought about it, and I was like, okay. And then he said, there's new wood glues that have been created in the last 10, 15 years that are much better than anything ever before. I was like, okay, great. And then Justin pointed out to me that this is not that bad, and Greeny is seen worse. And I thought about it, and I was like, you're right, Justin. And let me explain what that meant. Mm-hmm. Greeny, sometime in the 90s, was in Gary Moore's trunk. All right, Gary Moore was going down the M2 or something, you know, whatever the freeway was in England, and ran out of gas. Completely ran out of gas. You know, stopped on the freeway. Him and his manager got out and were just standing on the side of the road. A car came around from nowhere, full speed, didn't see the car, stopped, rammed into the car with Greeny in the trunk, or Greeny in the boot, as they say.
Right.
And Greeny was literally in 25 pieces. 25 pieces with the case. The case is in like probably 55 pieces. And, you know.
Neck came completely off, right?
Well, yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Right here. And there was some neck damage too. But, you know, whoever put it back together, and, you know, I know the person who put it back together, I should say, did a fantastic job. So what I did to Greeny a couple of weeks ago is kind of like, you know, just like maybe an arm sprain.
But this is part of the story of the guitar, though.
Yeah.
This is another chapter of the story of the guitar.
Yeah, because, you know, when Peter Green had it, the headstock was broken.
Right.
When Gary Moore had it, the headstock was broken. Now that I have it, and I accidentally broke the headstock, it's really my guitar now. But, you know, my thoughts on this guitar is, it's not my guitar. This is the people's guitar. You know, this guitar, and it's not my doing, this guitar wants to be heard. It wants to be played. People demand it. People want to hear it. They want to see it live. People have known this guitar way before I've had it. You know, there's a fan base out there that's connected to this guitar that has nothing to do with me.
I was psyched when you pulled it out last night and started playing it.
So, you know, when people say, hey, you have Greeny, you know, I'm not elitist about it. I was like, yeah, you want to see it? You want to hold it? Take pictures of it? Here, do it. It doesn't feel like this is my guitar. I feel like it's the people's guitar. I'm just the guy whose duty it is to play it for now, you know? When my time comes, I hope this guitar goes to a really great player, you know, to keep the tradition. You know, I don't have plans on like putting this guitar into retirement because it doesn't want to be in retirement. That's what I get, you know.
But there's no way, the slow motion you can probably replay in your brain of it going over, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is like slow motion. And, you know, it's interesting, that slow motion thing, you know. When I first saw Eddie Van Halen play in 1978 in Oakland, it seemed like he was doing everything in slow motion.
In
But
what
it
way?
was so fast and so great. But the way he was playing it, it didn't seem, there's like not a lot of effort. And it almost seemed like everything he was doing was in slow motion to him. But to us, it was friggin' like on another planet, you know? It got me to thinking, when I feel like my chops are at their fullest, everything seems like it's slow motion. Everything seems like it's slowing down, you know? Like fast runs, like they feel like slower, you know? It's a weird thing.
Do you think it's because when your chops are really good, then you can just play so far beyond what you're playing? So even fast things, you've got so much more gas in the tank.
I don't know. I think, it's even beyond that. It's like, your awareness and your presence is just so vast. It's almost like you're anticipating the moment before you play it.
Okay, so I'm going to play you some songs. I just want to get your reaction.
And doubles. That's one of my favorite riffs. I love this.
When you just hear the intro, it's so heavy.
Yeah. That song was written in 1985 and we tuned down to C sharp. And at that time, there were not that many bands that were tuning down. When I think about it, I know Black Sabbath was tuning down to D. I know that certain Hendrix stuff was tuned down to D. But I'm really hard-pressed to think about anyone else that tuned down that low. And we started tuning down low because of Sabbath, but for sure, but also because Cliff Burton used to carry around a classical guitar. Mm-hmm. Cliff Burton played a lot of guitar, and he would tune the thing down so that he can bend the strings.
Okay.
And it kind of like opened our ears up to the, doing that, the prospect of tuning stuff down and really loud and playing, in that fashion. And it was, I remember I thinking that maybe C sharp was too low because the strings felt a little flappy,
Okay.
It happened to work.
Did you feel the heaviness of it though when you did it?
Oh
right?
yeah. And that one riff. It's really cool, but really simple and basic. Like super simple and basic, but it's effective, And we look for riffs that are simple but effective. Busy stuff, overly complicated stuff, no. Progressive stuff that get to the point, yes. Simple stuff that are super effective, yes. Super busy stuff or a lot of notes, unnecessary notes, no.
Is this something that you would have just keep experimenting? What if we do this? What if we do this? Is that a Metallica thing?
It's always a thing, building up and setting things up for the next part. If you notice, almost all our songs, before the guitar solo, there's a setup. Before the guitar solo,
Right.
Something dynamic happens, so the guitar solo takes off, and that's very, very intentional.
Yeah.
And I almost demand that, something needs to happen so that when we set up to the plate, boom, the band goes somewhere else.
Right.
It's arrangement dynamics like that mean a lot to us. And it's always about building up, release of tension, and then coming back down and just building it up again, and then finding a way to stay someplace and finding a different dynamic, sometimes melodic, sometimes rhythmic or whatever, and then going back to the build again. Almost all Metallica songs are like that. It's something that we just naturally gravitated to, that we all wanted to hear. You know, it's pretty universal in all of us. We always say, okay, how are we going to set this up? Or it needs to build. Or it needs another part because it's not building properly. Arrangement, traditional arrangement, rules, we threw out the window.
You don't do traditional arrangements at all.
No. And, there are certain formulas. We don't have one formula. We have 5 or 6 different formulas. You can say okay, again, using the Ramones, there's only one type of Ramones
There's
song.
only one kind of Ramones song.
And we all love that. For Metallica, there's about 5 or 6 types of Metallica songs, You name any given song, okay, Fade to Black. You'll find that all our ballads are very, very similar, and that's a typical sort of formula that we use. But the arrangements are all very different, and the arrangements are all created so that it's very dynamic with peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys.
James made a point, I think it was about Master of Puppets, about the song last night, that it's amazing people listening to this almost 40 years later.
Yeah, it is amazing. It truly is. I tell you, the really, really amazing thing about that song is when that song first came out in 1986, people were running from that song. It was like, ah! Again, it was split right down the middle. People who didn't understand us and people who fully understood us. It wasn't, it took time for people to understand what we were about.
Yeah.
We weren't an easily accessible sounding band, you know? We were challenging. And in 1986, there was nothing like Master of Puppets.
No.
Nothing like that. But we were so fully behind it and believed in it. And we had the attitude we wanted to push it down people's throats, No, you will like this. We're going to push this down the throat and you will like it. That was our attitude. And it worked back then. And, it's amazing now because with my memories and experience of how it was back in 1986 compared to now, people get it right away, and that's a wonderful thing. And so I asked myself, has our musical culture progressed that much so that, our eyes are open enough to hear something like a young person can hear Master of Puppets and not find it offensive or challenging at all? That's a great thing, man.
It is.
And that just goes to show the musical evolution of, people who are listening to music in general and how it's made a difference with new generations. And it's weird because I'll run into a 14-year-old girl and she's listening to the darkest, most outrageous deathcore music, Right. And I'm thinking, wow, that's great. That is great because when we first started playing stuff, it was, I'd look out in our shows and it was just all guys, smelly, hairy guys, just wanted to beat each other up in the audience. It was that way for years. Then the Black Album came out and slowly we started, getting more of a mix of people. But from the Black Album on, it seems like every tour, more diversification.
I mean, half the crowd were women last night.
Yeah, and I love that because there was a time when there was all guys, and us guys being out on the road, having to look out in the audience on other guys. It's like, okay, here we go again. But then when the girls started showing up, we're like, all right, it's about time. Come on. We're happy about that. But nowadays, I'm just happy when I see a 7 or 8 year old kid and he knows our songs, And then I see the 7-year-old motherfucker who's just fucking just giving it all he's got, like he's 30 years old and come on, it just come out, you know? I love it. I think our music's for everyone. I really do. I think our music's cathartic. It's challenging. It makes people think, you know? It's, and I think, when you experience our music, it's one thing, but when you experience our music with other people, it's another different thing, you know? When people experience our music together, it takes on a different life. It's crazy. To this day, we write what we want to hear, and we always tell people that. James and I are just looking for guitar riffs that are fun to play. You know, the guitar riff has to be fun to play. It can't be a slog.
Okay, what is the most fun riff to play all night?
Master of Puppets is pretty damn fun to play, you know? Enter Sandman's they're all fun to play. They wouldn't be Metallica songs if they weren't fun to play. Bottom line, you know, if it isn't entertaining and doesn't hold mine and James's attention, it's not going to go anywhere. There's stuff that Lars goes, oh, that's great. And James and I are looking at each other going, no. We're not playing that every night for the next 10 years, no. You know, it's just how it is.
Okay, speaking of Enter Sandman.
Bill Rudd all the way.
When you were listening to that in the studio, how satisfying was that to hear?
Well, you have to understand, we only hear a version of that. I mean, that's the finished product.
Right.
You know, we a slightly a different, more unadulterated version of that. But, you know, before we go into the studio, we have an inkling of what songs are pretty freaking good and, you know, which ones are like ahead of the rest of them. We all just kind of just instinctively know that from going through the creative process with them. You know, this is what happens a lot of the times. We'll be working on the song, we have 2 or 3 parts, we're like, oh, okay, you know, maybe this song is good, maybe it's not. And then we'll add a part and all of a sudden, oh, okay, this sounds a little bitter. And then we'll add another part and it's like, okay, all of a sudden this song's really important. And we'll all feel that and talk about it and like, wow, this is really turning into something before we've even recorded a note, you know? So we kind of know what we're working with, you know, and the potential of it. I can remember hearing Enter Sandman when we were first recording it, the basic tracks, and just thinking, yeah, this is groovy. But I remember saying, but is it heavy metal or is it hard rock? And then I thought, I should not even worry about this,
right.
You know?
Okay, what is the difference between those two? This is interesting from your point of view.
What makes heavy metal different from hard rock is a more distorted guitar sound.
Okay.
Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chunks.
Chunks, right?
Yeah. Fast beats.
Okay.
Fast beats, you know, something that's about, like 180s or 220, you know, beats per minute, you know, beats per second, I mean. You know, and the attitude, bro. It has to have an aggressive attitude that's somewhat confrontational and somewhat challenging. Wow. You know, you don't want to play nice with your heavy metal riffs. You want them to be provocative and challenging, somewhat confrontational, with a little bit of aggression. People want to hear that, you know? They want to hear aggression, they want to hear confrontation, because I feel that it dispels their own feelings of that and, like, you know, kind of like calms them down. And I go all the way back to when I was a kid and how music and guitar playing calmed me down. Heavy metal is a perfect therapeutic music. Yeah. Our manager likes to say this. Every year, there's a 12-year-old boy somewhere who's fucking pissed off at his parents and pissed off at life and doesn't know what to do. And then he hears Enter Sandman and is like, what was that? And he goes out and buys the album. It's like, yeah. And then he like looks and then he hears Master of Puppets. It's like, yes. And then it's the answer to like his aggression, you know, his frustration, his pent-up emotions. It's a real outlet. It's a real outlet. And I believe that because it was for me, and it still is for me, totally till now. And I believe that's universal. And I also believe that's why heavy metal is here to stay. It's a true world music. The reason why I say that is because nowadays I see bands out there in weird places of the world taking their folk music, their local music, their colloquial music, and adding a heavy aspect to it, And it's great. And the best example of that is this band called The Who. I don't know if you're aware of them, but they're from Mongolia.
Okay.
And they play Mongolian instruments. And they play heavy metal, and it's amazing sounding. Wow. And I'm hearing tones and heaviness from instruments that I'm not recognizing, weird bowed stuff. And they actually covered one of our songs. They covered Sad But True, and it was otherworldly in terms of its heaviness, And I know that's happening all over the world. I hear heavy metal Mali music, African music, I hear, heavy metal with a merengue kind of thing, down in South America. It's crazy, all the different permutations of heavy metal. And that's why I think heavy metal is a true world music in that it gets to the core of what people feel.
You talked last night about improvisation and how important it is for contemporary bands.
Yes, very important.
And that, do you feel like it's getting lost, that people work things out too much?
Yeah, it's just, I think that when there's there's a real element of integrity, and there's, at the same time, it's exciting. It's a little dangerous. You never know what to expect with improvisation. And I think that's why it's so intriguing for me to watch people improvise. And there used to be bands that would go out there and improvise forever, like the Allman Brothers or Mahavishnu Orchestra, Led Zeppelin. I mean, they'd go out there and they'd improvise. And I always loved the aspect of those bands. And I thrive off improvisation myself. I consider myself an improvisational musician first and foremost, not a heavy metal guy, not a guitar player, an improvisational musician, because I believe that improvisation is everything. Everything comes from improvisation. Technique, songwriting, solving musical problems. It's all improvisation. And so, I always feel that there's certain musical muscles, you work your musical muscles collectively and it forms your technique. The improvisation muscle, I feel, is the most important muscle to work. And I work at it every single day, because I hear these master improvisationists like John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Miles Davis, and they're playing perfect solos just in the moment,
Right.
All the best notes. And that's what I aspire to. I aspire to catching beauty in the moment, And in my band, it's hard to capture those moments. But off stage, that's what I'm constantly pursuing. And I write a lot of music all the time, and I have tons and tons of backlogs of different types of music. And it's my goal now to start writing music that supports that improvisational aspect, I'm going to start writing, just a bunch of different types of things that showcase the improvisational aspect. And, hopefully in time, I'll be able to share it with everyone. But I believe that is missing from bands these days, at least contemporary bands. Everything is so, thought out. And that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. Pop bands, that's their thing. But I just miss that improvisational aspect. I miss that danger.
Right.
It's of not knowing what's going to happen while you're watching this band, Watching Duane Allman and Dickie Betts, you never knew what the hell they were going to play. But it's going to be exciting and somewhat dangerous,
Right.
And I love that. I don't want to be a boring musician. I think that's my fear, is just to be boring, because I've been bored by other musicians. I don't want to be that musician.
When you get up in the morning and you get, what would be your daily routine? When do you start playing your guitar? Do you like playing late in the day, late at night?
I always play early in the morning because I feel like there's not
your mind's open.
Yeah, not a lot of distractions in my head.
Yeah,
and a lot of my musical ideas come to me in the morning, and then I meditate every day.
Okay,
and occasionally I'll just be there in my meditation and I'll get an info dump. That's what I call it. All of a sudden, all these ideas come into my head.
Wait, but that's not supposed to be happening, Kirk, when you're meditating.
No,
right?
that's not true. That's not true. That's a myth about meditation.
Okay,
just to get off subject. It's okay for thoughts and ideas to come into your head, but you have to also let them go. Okay. But a lot of times, thoughts come into your head that are actually
music thoughts, music
ideas? Thoughts or information, and I take note. Because at that point, my mind is in that same state, super open to anything that can happen in the present. And sometimes musical problems that I've been working on for days or weeks, the answer will come to me during those meditations. I'll take a note and just keep on meditating. It'll go away, and eventually I find a spot where I'm like, there's no thoughts in my head for a long period of time. But for me, playing guitar in the morning is the best. And then during the course of the day, I have lots of things I'm doing, stuff around the house. In passing, I'll pick up my guitar and play for 15, 20 minutes. And I usually do that 4 or 5 times a day. And I really think nothing of it. But, when I look back, that's another hour right there of playing. And then later on, I've always had this habit of playing guitar while watching television or movies or something. and I'll just be there sitting there watching television, not really paying attention. And sometimes I'll play something. I go, did that just happen? And then, wow, again.
Okay, and then where do those ideas go? Do you put them on your phone?
On my phone,
yeah.
Yeah, and hope I don't lose my phone.
I've heard you've lost your phone before with hundreds and hundreds of ideas, right?
At least an album's worth of ideas easily. And, I try to recall some of that stuff from my brain, but there's no way, And I only have memories of what that stuff was.
Okay, I got to ask you about when you step on your wah-wah, does it become a different instrument?
It's another instrument for me.
Right.
For me, it is another instrument that demands my practice and, demands a certain kind of technique. And, the wah pedal can also be a phase shifter for me. It can also be a filter for me. But it is also could be a balls out thing that takes my playing to a different level. And sometimes I'll feel like stepping on a wall in the most inappropriate time. I'm guilty of that. But sometimes I step on the wall when it's just perfect. But I can't get away from it. I love the wall. I freaking love it. It shapes the notes like my voice. It's a funny thing. You ask Rob Trujillo, when we're in the studio playing and we all have headphones on and we're all playing, if I'm playing a solo and I'm on my wall pedal, Rob says what he does is he takes his headphones off and listens to me, and he says that I growl and I make all these guttural sounds while I'm playing my guitar, and I'm not really conscious of it, but what I think I'm doing is I'm trying to match what
You're vocalizing that,
I'm
right?
vocalizing. Basically, I'm vocalizing with the wah pedal.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm addicted to it. And people, it's an easy thing for me, for people to tease me for. And whatever. But I fucking love it. And I get great results. And I think, it sounds great.
It's an art. I love it. I love when you play wah. And it's an art.
It is an art. Not everyone can play wah effectively, too. I must have about 200 wah pedals in my house. I got so many Kline Vox wah pedals.
Is there one, though, that's like the magic one, or no?
There is one, and I only have one of them, and I break it out every single time I go into the studio, and it's the dime bag wah.
Okay.
you know. And I love Dimebag. I loved him as a guy. I loved him as a person. I loved him as a player. And, and I to this day, I just have like a lot of emotions toward, towards those him and his brother. But he made a wah that has this pickup selector where you can toggle through all the various things, and it's the greatest idea.
Wah.
And on top of that, there's a boost.
Yes.
And I was like, when I was like looking at this wall, I thought, this is the wall that I should have made. And when Dunlap said, let's put out your version of the wall, I really wanted to just copy it, but I didn't, just out of respect for Dimebag. But that's the wall for me. It's the Dimebag wall. It's the greatest wall that's ever been fucking made. I love the old Vox Clyde pedals.
Yes, those are great.
Because they sound like all those 60s players, Clapton, fucking Beck, Page. But the sweep, it's not wide enough for me.
So I saw you guys, I mentioned this last night, I saw you guys play in 2018, I think it was, in Atlanta. And I believe it was the first time you guys first tour using the fractals on, maybe.
Yep.
Avenged Sevenfold was opening for you, and they had mic'd amps and everything. And they were in a stadium, and it's tough. You never know what you're going to get sound-wise.
Yep.
And there's sound where I was standing was really muddy, and then you came on, and it was super clear. I know that you're a huge fan of amplifiers, but now you've gone to fractals, which for those of you out there, fractals are
digital modelers.
Digital modelers.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me what the benefits of having these are.
It used to drive me crazy when we'd go on tour and we'd have amp heads and pretty much sound different every single show, And there's a lot of factors involved in that. And a lot of it is mic placement on speakers, the travel of the amps.
Bouncing around.
Yep. Going through different temperatures, different types of humidity. Marshall amps the bias is super sensitive, and anything can change the bias.
Yes.
Literally anything can change the bias. Put it in the back of a U-Haul truck. The bias will change and the sound would change. It used to drive me crazy, and I used to think I was going crazy, because I'd come to a gig, I'd plug in, and it would be so radically different from the night before. Or I'd come in, I'd ask my tech, what's it like today? And he'd go, so, or horrible, whatever. We'd always had to tweak.
Okay.
Always have to tweak. Do something, make a minor adjustments. And, it was just par for the course back then. It was just part of, touring and like dealing with your guitar sound from day to day, because it was always changing. But then, these digital modelers started showing up, Fractor, Kemper, and all these different things. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Maybe it's like a Line 6, because there was a time when everyone was using Line 6 stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was explained to me what these things are capable of. And I thought, okay, let's try it out. And at that time, we were, we had just come off recording Hardwired. And so my amp setup in the studio was still set up, and James's amps, set up in the studio was still set up. And so one day, Justin, my tech, and Greg Fiddleman and I went in there, and we literally cycled through every single head and every single speaker we had and found the best ones and, got the best heads and then put the sound together. I think we blended like 2 or 3 different amps and got the overall sound together. And then we modeled it with the Fractal. And it was amazing because I had a studio quality sound in my Fractal, album quality sound. That's a hard thing to do. And, especially when you blend like 50 amps to get one sound.
Yeah.
You can't do that on the road. We mentioned that earlier. But all of a sudden with Fractal, you could do that. And so we did that. And then James and I instantly realized that this is what we were looking for this whole time because the consistency between being in rehearsal, going on tour, playing radio shows, TV shows, award shows, going into the studio, recording, the sound is consistent through all of that.
Right.
And that saves us so much time and headache and heartache. Literally. I mean, it's just like, it gives us a confidence in our sound, just knowing our sound is there.
Is it especially important too on these massive, you're playing stadiums, because it's so consistent no matter where you're where you're standing, you get your in-ears in, and you know that the sounds are going to be right for the songs.
If it sounds good in our in-ears, that's not necessarily how it sounds out in the house.
Okay.
And, you need to sound like, just get some sort of feel for what it sounds out in the house. And, that could be difficult if you're doing a sound check and there's no one in the house. Just the other day, James and I are going, wow, our guitars sound great. Of course, there was no one in MetLife Stadium. Right? Next day, Friday, 80,000 people. I hit a chord, it's like muffled. I'm like, oh. I look over at James, and James had that same expression. And I knew that we were hearing the same thing. That happens.
Sure.
You never know what a place is going to sound like once it's filled in with people. So a lot of times, I'll use a handy little presence knob and just turn it up maybe a couple notches, and it seems to do what I need it to do.
But back in the studios, though, are using the amps right now.
Oh, yeah. And, I love amps. I love tubes, I love the tube sound. I always gravitate towards amps and speakers. I love feeling the air being pushed by a fucking speaker behind me. I'm old school that way, It's real, almost visceral kind of feeling, playing through an amp. I get that from fractals, but but because I started off in analog,
Right.
and tubes to begin with.
Yeah.
And, I go into Logic and they have all these canned sounds, and they all sound pretty goddamn good.
Right.
And some of the tones sound like my heroes. And I hear it playing back and it's good, but I always feel like there's something missing. And I can't ever quite put my finger on it. And it's annoying that I can't put my finger on it, but I know it's missing.
People ask me, Rick, why don't you use these? It's like, well, I have 60 amplifiers here at my studio, and I just mic them up, and I much rather, and we talked about this last night, turn knobs.
Yeah.
It's far easier than, and the fractal's great, but it's very complicated to change things on it.
You can't make a quick change on it.
No.
And, my tech, he's very, very good on the computer to begin with, and he can make a change somewhat quickly.
Yep.
If I was to do it, it would take me literally hours. I'm not qualified for that kind of thing. Turning knobs, literally, I could do that for days. Happily, I'll do that, for days. But when it comes to the digital stuff, yeah, again, I'm at the boundary of my thoughts right there.
Is there one particular album, I like to ask people this, of all your albums where you feel like the songs and the production were exactly what you kind of had imagined?
Master of Puppets, for a number of reasons, I really felt that lineup's peak. And when I mean that, it's, we were peaking with Cliff Burton,
Yeah.
And he was writing amazing stuff. And I would sit there, because we roomed together, I would sit there and watch him play his detuned classical guitar, and he'd play the weirdest, craziest stuff. Really weird stuff, And then he'd put on this Les Paul copy and start playing along to Lynyrd Skynyrd songs, and I get annoyed after a while because he'd stop the track and go point out to Ed King solo and go, "What's he doing there?" And he goes, "Do you know what he's doing?" I go, "Yeah." And then he said, "Please show it to me." And then I'd have to show him like a basic guitar thing,
Right.
And then he would play it for he'd play it for the next 3 hours, over and over. And he used to drive me crazy. But, that was his process. Arrangement-wise, songwriting wise, sonically, playing wise, we coalesced in a way that we had not coalesced at that point, and it just like makes me wonder what And Justice for All would have been like with Cliff. I actually, that's a thought that I still contemplate. But Master of Puppets, for me, it's a very sentimental album.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we knew we were onto something, and we knew it was provocative, and we knew that it might not be accepted by anyone, but we were fully 1,000% committed to it, every single note. And we had to be, really. We had to be. And, I think it shows. When I revisit it now, I get flooded by a bunch of memories. I mean, even when you were just playing the thing that should not be. I remember that was the last song we finished on that album, writing. And, we finished it in the studio, and I remember I had 45 minutes to do that guitar solo because I had to leave for the airport. And I thought to myself, I better fucking get this guitar solo done in 45 minutes or else I'm going to be staying in Copenhagen for a little bit longer than I anticipated. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And the guitar solo that's on the album, I did in 45 minutes.
So when you look back at things, you just played, like we said, for 160,000 people over the course of 2 days. And it's basically 40 years since the first record came out. Doesn't that just blow your mind?
Oh, it's mind-blowing, because, and this is a sentiment that we all kind of shared, when Kill 'Em All first came out, we were happy to be playing clubs from coast to coast. At that point, we thought we'd made it, For me, it was just like, I'm actually making money playing music, and it isn't like, just piddly change. It's just like I can actually go out and like go to a diner and buy myself, a meal, for the week.
Right.
Because I came from nothing. I didn't come from a family with money. My family was poor. I'll say it. And my first guitar, I had a Strat. I couldn't afford a case. I used to carry it around in a garbage bag. I'd go on, the bus or on BART, what's this, the subway system in the Bay Area. And I'd have to put it in a garbage bag because I didn't want to attract attention to it, because there were a lot of unsavory characters. And if they saw like, a skinny teenager carrying a shiny guitar like that, that instantly was a target. So I knew better to just cover it up with a garbage bag and make it look like it was just a bag of garbage. To go from that to playing MetLife for 160,000 people, it's touching, it's inspirational, and just like, I feel the love and I feel blessed because ultimately I think music is a nonverbal language that everyone understands. There's all this talk about extraterrestrials. They might be clued into our music too, and that's even more trippy to think about. Knowing that I'm helping people in a positive fashion means so much to me. Really does.
Okay, so I want to ask you this. I like to ask when I have guitar players on, what you're practicing. Like, what do you work on? What do you work on to licks you're working on, things that you work on for technique.
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on lately?
I always have my warm up.
Okay, and which is what?
My warm up is the same warm up. It's just like Joe Satriani taught me in like 1982.
Okay.
When we're just all of us are just struggling, starving musicians. And, it's called, the jazz chord relay is what he calls it.
Okay.
It's like, major chord.
Wait, I don't know the jazz chord relay. Hold on. What's the jazz chord relay?
This is what I'm showing you. Joe Satriani taught me that when I was like 18 years old, and I've been doing it ever since.
And he calls it the jazz chord relay.
Yeah. I think that's...
That was incredibly... I know that. I see the shapes you're doing. Do it again.
That's like a really, major,
That is
And then
That
you
is
can go,
awesome.
Then you can go.
And that is your warm-up.
That's like basically probably the first thing I do.
Okay.
But then I do what everyone just like acknowledges is a time-tested best warm-up for everyone, which is the old chromatic thing, I mean, just like, all the way up. All the way up, and then back,
So that's your warm-up. You get your fingers going. Then what? Will you?
I'll play. I'll go through the modes.
Okay.
Standard thing. Standard thing. I'll go through the modes and cycle fourths.
Okay.
So I start in A. The next one's D.
Yep.
Next one's G. Next one's C. Cycle fourths. I'll go through all that, and then usually I'm like, okay, do I have any riffs in me? And that's what I always go. Do I have any songs come up? Riffs, melodies, progressions, and then a lot of times stuff will come. A lot of times stuff doesn't come, and then I'll think, well, what's caught my ear in the last few days, And one day I was just like fucking on Instagram, and then all of a sudden I saw this guy go. And I was like, I love that. I got to play it. I got to learn it. And so I learned it, And then later on, a couple days later, I'll be sitting there and I'll hear a song on the radio and go, wow, that sounds like it might be a really fun thing to play on guitar. And then I'll go and learn it, And then I'll discover there's fingerings in there that I'm not accustomed to. Okay, good example.
Oh my God. Genesis.
Great guitar song.
Great guitar song.
And I love.
I was thinking about that song the other day about what a great guitar song it is, and nobody talks about that song as a guitar song. It's an amazing guitar song.
It's a great, and I look for stuff like that.
Yes.
I look for things that are interesting and great and different for me to play, and the Jackson 5 thing and this. They're interesting for me to play, and they put my hands in positions that I'm not accustomed to. And so, I'm like, yeah, man, I love this type of stuff. And so I'm always looking for that. I'm always looking for different grips, Stuff like that. I live for that. And then I get obsessed, and I'm always trying to play it. And jazz chords for me are the best way for me to practice, because it strengthens my hands in ways that not accustomed to, and it really helps my lead playing jazz chords. So I'm constantly looking for difficult shapes, chords that I don't know, and I love open string chords too. And So, I'm always playing that kind of stuff. I love those type of chords that ring out with open strings. So I'm always trying to find positions like that. And then I'm still obsessed with people like Jeff Beck, Hendrix. I'm so, Michael Shaker. I'm still learning that stuff because I love it. It's like, what's that fucking Hendrix song?
Hey, so before we started today, you hipped me to something. Jimi Hendrix's guitar string gauges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Blew my mind.
Yeah, that was a really.
Hold on, I'm going to look it up here. So who told you about this? Bob Rock, right?
Yeah.
And I had to write this down. And okay, so from the high E, 10, 13, 15, 26, 32, 38. That is one weird hybrid set.
Especially a 15 as a G string.
Right.
Know? And the G string never freaking stays in tune anyway, and that's a really light G string.
Right.
And Jimmy, I mean, granted he was out of tune a lot of the times, but he did a good job at still playing through that. But it's amazing because when you string up a Strat, especially a maple capped Strat with that gauge, it's a large part of his sound. And I love that aspect about guitar playing because there's all these things that you can just discover.
Sure.
And then it opens up a whole nother sort of like realm of thinking. When I found that out, I was thinking, what? How does that G string even like able to exist so low? But then it got me thinking, I wonder what it would be like if I started messing with my string gauges and how string gauges would be affected by different tunings,
Sure.
It's important for me to when I hear something like that to just think it out.
Sure.
Because it's number one, it's inspiring, and number two, it might lead me to do something that I've never done before. And that's another thing is I'm constantly looking for just like things I've never done before. And granted, my band is not a good outlet for a lot of the stuff I'm talking about.
Which is why you're going to be working on it.
It's just I'm always working on music, and I'm going to start putting out a lot of my own stuff because I just have a lot of it, And Metallica just has more time nowadays. We tour less, and I love being on the road. I love recording. I love playing guitar. I don't ever want to stop working, and because we tour less, we work less. But I don't accept that. I'm just going to keep on working.
You play just as much as you ever did.
Exactly. And last year I put out my first solo album, Portals, And for me, that was a huge accomplishment because it was music that I'd been sitting on for a while. And I knew I had to break the ice. And so that was how I broke the ice. And now, I have plans to just start putting out music, and if people are thinking it's going to be Metallica music, it's not going to be Metallica music. There might be Metallica flavors because Metallica is part of who I am.
Sure, of course.
A quarter of me is Metallica. So even though I don't know what the finished product is going to be like, there will be moments where it might be Metallica-ish, but my whole goal is just completely just do something different. And I like doing different things. And I like showing to other people that, I'm into other types of music. I appreciate most music out there. And I have a lot of ideas that I think they're just like, I want people to hear.
Well, Kirk, I really appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Thanks.
This has been amazing. It's been so great to meet you.
Mm-hmm. Likewise.
And don't drop Greeny.
I'm not going to. God.
Awesome.
Jeez.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you, man.
All right.